Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Lost in Science. It is science again on your radio or podcast device, depending on how you choose to listen to this fabulous program. Joining me, as always, is the wonderful Stu. Stu, how are you?
I'm very well, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm a bit flat out, Stu. I've been moving house, and it's taking it out of me. I got to say that.
Well, I did allude to that the other week, but at least you didn't have to double all of your housing contents as you did it, which was part of the story.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yes. People do say that moving house is one of the most stressful life events. I did actually do a quick kind of look up to see whether there's any science behind that, and it just seems to be a bold claim that people make. I did find some studies about stressful life events, and moving house did not make the lists, but I don't know. You choose to believe what you want to believe, I think, in this. It's all subjective. There were some non-scientific surveys, done by, say, moving companies, who survey, a few hundred people who will go, yes, moving is really stressful. How can you help me? I don't know if I trust those. They're not published in peer-reviewed journals.
They may not be neutral in their outlook either.
They may not be entirely neutral. No, I think that's the case. Anyway, real science. Stu, what have you got for us?
Well, speaking of bold claims, I'm actually having a look at conspiracy theories, which is, it's a recurring theme on the show. I think we do sort of tackle a lot of these, but conspiracy theories are a sort of kind of a social problem. I suppose is probably one way to look at them. And there is, there's been a lot of effort gone into how do we get people who've gone down the metaphorical rabbit hole. How do we pull them back out of that rabbit hole? So there's been a lot of studies about, different methods of trying to get people off the conspiracy theory wagon. But I wanted to talk about a systematic review, which is one of our favorite kinds of review. A systematic review, which was just recently published, which looked at all of the conspiracy theory sort of approaches of interventions and which ones work best and how do they work best. So I'm going to be talking about that.
Okay, well, I look forward to the truth being not out there, but in there, as in this program.
The truth is in here. Yes.
Truth is in here. That's right. That's right. And if you think that Stu is covering up something by doing this, then I don't know. Maybe you should listen to his story. Well, I'm going to be taking it easy. I'm just going to be listening to plants.
The secret sounds of plants.
That's right. That's right. There has been some new research about plants and how they can actually emit sounds when under stressful conditions. We know that plants, we're gradually becoming more aware that plants can communicate with each other, but it seems they can actually communicate via sound, or at least emit sounds and maybe even listen to sounds. So we're going to find out what this is all about. And I don't know, Stu, you can lend some of your expertise on plant communication as well.
Yeah, look, I've been sort of aware of this story, but I haven't had a good chance to dig into it. Pardon the pun. I'll be interested to hear what the actual research says, and maybe we can figure out what it actually means, I guess, is the other question.
Yeah, what are the plants trying to tell us? Well, stay tuned for that, and maybe even some sounds of talking plants. Later in the show.
Now, conspiracy theories have been in the spotlight over the last couple of years, but they're obviously nothing new. The moon landing hoax has been a claim at least as long as the film Capricorn 1 came out, which is about the American government faking a Mars landing, not a moon landing. But certainly the increase in lunar landing hoaxes peaked after that, or it's still rising, I think, but certainly jumped up in numbers. But conspiracy theories today seem to have a much more politically divisive angle, whether it be QAnon or COVID vaccine conspiracies. The divisions they're causing in society are a problem, and they're finding their way into courtrooms and houses of parliament and various government agencies from time to time. And there's even concern that far-right groups are deliberately fueling conspiracy theories that challenge mainstream information in order to grow just general dissent in the population, which undermines legitimate governments all over the world, and it helps, far-right extremists to win people over to their cause, I suppose. But, with all this in mind, it's worth considering how to approach conspiracy theories and try and help people who promote them to see the ways in which they're often damaging and possibly even dangerous. There are even studies that show a connection between people who subscribe to conspiracy beliefs and, avoidance of healthcare, as well as extremist and sometimes violent behaviour. So there is good reason to sort of figure out how we can potentially stop these irrational beliefs as well. So a great deal of research into interventions in conspiracy theories has shown often very little impact in many of the methods that have been tried to influence or to reduce conspiracy beliefs in people. But an Irish team of researchers have just published a systematic review, which is, a pretty high level of scientific review. They've looked at a lot of studies and narrowed it down and found studies that fit their criteria, which was pretty rigorous as well. So they started off with over 2,000 studies and narrowed it down. But they've basically looked at interventions designed for the purpose of reducing people's belief in conspiracies, and have found that while many are not very effective in doing that, there may be some ways to help, and there's particular ways to approach the issue. So the study was published in PLOS One. They ended up with, as I said, they started with 2,000 studies. They narrowed it down to 13 studies that included intervention into conspiracy beliefs between or within groups of adults, as in over 18, with no clinical psychiatric afflictions. So they tried to exclude as much noise from this review as they possibly could by having quite rigorous criteria to choose them.
Now, this sounds to me like something that is quite difficult to study. So like a systematic review, I guess, for people who don't know too much about that, it is, as you say, you get a whole lot of other studies that have examined an issue, and you try to combine them all together to get sort of, I suppose, maybe, a consensus or an overall view of what works for something. But of course you're limited by the studies that go into it. And in this case, I mean, like with a lot of medical stuff, you try to find the gold standard of research, which is your randomized controlled trials, double blinded, ideally, this kind of stuff. What sort of studies are they doing in this kind of area that these 13 studies that they've narrowed it down to, are they high quality studies, or are they, what are they?
They are high quality studies, and I think what they did here was they're not sort of surveys or anything like that. They're actual experimental studies where they've taken participants in groups, tried various things, exposed them to conspiracy theories that they didn't have opinions about before the experiment. So it is an actual experimental sort of cohort of studies. They're not just, social surveys of what people already think or anything like that. So they're pretty well set up psychological studies. So they are, they've got before and after, they've got within group, they've got control groups and all that sort of thing. But obviously with what people think and what they believe, it is a bit harder to gauge than, say, a medical study. But the studies that they've looked at are pretty high quality studies, and that's why they excluded so many studies from the systematic review, was because a lot of the other stuff wasn't focused on what they wanted to know, and it wasn't necessarily these kind of experimental before and after studies as well, which is what they're really focusing on.
Right.
So they found that very few intervention methods had a large effect on preventing an increase in conspiracy beliefs among the participants. And those that did involved an intervention before someone is exposed to the conspiracy ideas. So the ones that showed a big effect, you had to get in before people had actually learned about this conspiracy that they were testing for.
They call this pre-bunking, I believe. Instead of debunking, it's pre-bunking.
It's a sort of it's a clever name, but basically the three methods that had a large effect were what they called fact-based inoculation, pseudoscience classes, and logic-based inoculation. So fact-based inoculation showed the strongest effect in preventing conspiracy beliefs, and this involves giving participants specific information about a particular area where there's a conspiracy existing about that thing that you're giving them information about. So that had the strongest effect. Pseudoscience classes is where they were given classes designed to give participants a better understanding of beliefs that sound scientific but are not science-based, and how to identify those pseudoscience ideas when they're presented to the people. So they're basically learning what to look for that sounds plausible, but it's not actually plausible. So there are sort of key indicators of pseudoscience, and I think we've talked about that on the show before too. And finally, the logic-based inoculation is based on general logical principles. So logical principles by which illogical claims and ideas can be identified, rather than specific information about a topic. So ways of looking for logical fallacies in what people are saying is a way to, be prepared for the presentation of conspiracy ideas. So those are the three that had the strongest effects, and they had what these researchers termed a large effect. So it was, a very, very strong effect, and the probabilities were very low and that sort of stuff that it was incorrect. Now, other interventions had a medium effect, what they classed as a medium effect in conspiracy prevention, were also all prior to exposure to the conspiracy. And they included things like anti-conspiracy arguments. You present arguments against a conspiracy before you expose them to the conspiracy. And also, which is an interesting one too, resistance to persuasion training. So they get trained in ways to identify persuasive language and sort of fight against it, I suppose, and be immune to it. So there was quite a few other things that had minor effects in reducing conspiracy thinking, including things like debunking or ridiculing arguments, but also, and this is, I guess, a bit of a change, appealing to empathy doesn't seem to have a strong effect. So if you ask people to think about the people that will be hurt by the conspiracy and all those sorts of things, doesn't actually seem to have a strong effect on on whether people take up a conspiracy belief or not, which is an interesting finding, because it was a piece of advice that was kind of floating around fairly recently that, that's one way to do it, is appeal to their sort of humanity and appeal to their empathy. Doesn't seem to have a strong effect at all. Ultimately, what they found was the best way to prevent conspiracy thinking is to promote critical thinking in people before they are exposed to conspiracy ideas. And both specific and general logic and fact-based methods can do that, can actually prepare people to look for these things and look for faults in the arguments. It's really just certainly when I was at school, we did used to have to do debates, and that was one of the things you were supposed to do in the debate, was look for these logical flaws in the argument. That's something that seems to, according to this research, have a strong effect on helping prevent people from falling into these conspiracy ideas. And just on a personal note, it seems like this might be a good component to include in, say, compulsory school curriculums, maybe even in primary school. But I think certainly at some point in our schooling, before we expect people to vote for anything.
I think we're lost.
We're not lost.
Not even any short-range radio signals yet?
Except for a single, very powerful radio emission.
Of course, a transmitter of that sort isn't exactly standard equipment.
Science and technology must be absolutely mind-boggling.
Of course, it's mostly on the theoretical side.
Well, so far.
Across Australia on the Community Radio Network, you're listening to Lost in Science.
All right, yes, you're listening to Lost in Science. Now, I suppose the question we're looking at here, well, that I'm looking at, and I don't want to sound all conspiratorial here, but what are plants talking about when we're not looking or listening? If a tree falls in the forest, do other trees hear it, I guess? Stu, what do you have to say?
Well, look, there's a lot of research into plant communication over recent years. The last sort of 20 years, we've seen a lot of research that shows that they communicate through hormonal signals that they can send through the air and different chemical signals from one plant to another when they get attacked and all this sort of stuff. They've also got underground networks of connections through mycorrhizal fungi that connect plants together, and they can signal each other through that in various ways as well. But a lot of it's kind of, a plant gets attacked by something and it sends out a signal that it's stressed, and other plants can receive that signal through various means and bolster their own protective, mechanisms that are built into the plant. So they're basically saying, ow, ow, something's eating me pretty well, is most of what they're saying.
And that's what's observed, really, isn't it? You have a plant under stress and its neighbours then act kind of in advance of them being exposed to the threat themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of, it's kind of like the pack or the herd mentality of, one animal sends out the alarm and the other animals all flee, and that benefits everyone, I suppose. It's sort of just a survival of the fittest, but also the more of you there are, the more likely one of you is going to survive, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. Now, this is, I guess, already kind of maybe changing the way that we view the plant kingdom. But, it may be, I guess it might be easier then to think, okay, so yes, the plants are communicating via chemical signals and stuff, but question I'm wondering is, could they actually talk to each other using sound? Now, there has been a bit of research in recent years about plants responding to just sound, and I'm not talking about playing music to your plants, which is kind of like a fashion or a fad that doesn't seem to have gone away.
I do recall, if you remember the show Mythbusters, that they did test this, and they found that heavy metal music kept the most pests away. Not anything to do with the taste of the listeners or anything like that, but that's what they found. The only other thing I can think of with sound and plants is that I'm pretty sure triffids could communicate with sound.
Yeah, well, yes.
They could knock out little messages to each other and tell each other where there was tasty humans to eat.
Well, yeah, well, we might have a look at the Triffids later, if any of this goes. But like I said, there's been a bit of research, and I found a few mentions of some things like apparently some plants, the type of nectar they produce can change during the presence of buzzing of bees. There was an experiment where they played white noise to certain plants, Arabidopsis plants. Are you familiar with those ones?
Arabidopsis is a model organism for plant studies. It's got a very simple or a very well understood genome, so they often use Arabidopsis in experiments. Yes.
Yeah, and there's and that one they caused them some drought tolerant responses, apparently. And there's another experiment that had corn plants and young corn plants, and they found the roots of them would move towards certain sounds or certain frequencies.
Obviously, corn plants would be susceptible to sound because they have ears of corn.
Hey, I was going to say too. They also. In that particular experiment, they also found that the plant roots would emit some clicking sounds, or dare I say, popping sounds.
That's where the popcorn.
Yeah, your ear joke was better. But there's been some new, more recent research by a team at Tel Aviv University, and they found specifically that plants under stress can produce sounds. So the plants in question were, I guess, your fairly easily studied tomato and tobacco plants, but there's also grapevines, pincushion cactus, maize and wheat, and henbit dead nettle, whatever that is.
Probably a weed of some description.
Yeah. So what they did was they had some microphones to record sounds, and they exposed the stems of the plants either to drought conditions or they severed them near the soil. And then they compared those recordings to unstressed plants as well as just empty pots without plants in them. And they found that the stressed plants emitted more sounds than the unstressed plants. And I'm going to attempt to play for you some of the sound that they recorded. So I should say that sound is actually been, the frequency has been changed. It was ultrasonic. Ultrasonic? No. What's the other one?
Infrasonic.
Infrasonic, I think.
So below the range of frequencies that humans can hear?
I think that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
No, hang on. No, it was ultrasonic. So it was ultrasonic. It was high frequencies. So above the range that humans can hear.
Okay.
I was for some reason expected to be infrasonic, but it was actually ultrasonic. I got that wrong. And they kind of downsampled the frequency so that we can hear it. And yeah, you do this kind of like a popping sound. I don't know. I thought it was maybe a little bit like the clicking of the Triffids that you talked about.
Yeah.
But these weren't plants that were hunting. These are plants that are, like I said, under stress. And what they found was that, there was more of this popping sounds as the stress increased, although it then started to decline as the plants dried up. And the sounds could be detected over a fairly long distance, from up to a few meters, like 3 to 5 meters, which suggests that it could be used for long-range communication. But they haven't, of course, been able to confirm whether this actually is a communication method between plants, or whether it is used at all. Like, in theory, some of these sounds can be heard by certain animals. Some insects can hear these frequencies, and they may give them clues to what is going on with the plant life. But further work is, I guess, required to see whether the plants themselves can hear these stress sounds from their neighbours. I guess, though, yeah.
I guess one of the questions that we need to ask is this just the sound of a stress response? Is this some biochemical or biomechanical process that the plant undergoes during stress that just happens to give off sound? Or is it some other kind of signaling, like you said? Is it some sort of communication?
Yeah, well, so they're suggesting that it's probably caused by air bubbles inside the water conducting tissue of the plants. So it does kind of suggest that it could just be something that's caused by the drying conditions. But then doesn't stop it then, I guess, being used by, say, other organisms who may be able to hear this. Like potentially by humans as well. Like, for instance, if plants are giving off these sounds when they need water, and you had a microphone set up, then your plant could essentially tell you when it needs watering. But whether it is an active form of communication, I guess that is the other question. But I suppose, you can look at it two ways. Like, is the plant deliberately trying to send a message out? Or if it's just happening, it still doesn't stop other plants maybe from hearing it and responding to it, knowing that there are drought conditions nearby. Yeah,
they can still adapt to, the distress signals, even if they're not deliberate distress signals. They can still adapt to make use of them, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, there is a lot more work to be done on this, but it is fascinating that, I guess, for many of us, people who are not as aware of the plant kingdom as you might be, Stu, to learn about the richness of their lives and wonder what they might say to us if they could, which might just be water me, but let's start with the essentials first. And that's it for another episode of Lost in Science. Lost in Science is recorded for 3CR in Melbourne on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and it airs across Australia on the Community Radio Network with the support of the Community Broadcasting Foundation. We would love you to get in touch with us. You can email us at lostinsci@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, we're Lost in Science on 3CR, or on Twitter, where we're at Lost in Science 1. You can find us on your favourite podcast app, where if you get the chance, please give us a good rating and review, as that will raise us up in the search rankings so other people can find the science. Or you can listen to us however you listen to us now, where at the same time every week, Claire, Stu and Chris get Lost in Science!
Thanks for listening to a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online.